Welcome to episode 8 of Two Girls, One Podcast. I'm Zoe,
And I am Ming Chang.
and today is a very special episode for us because for the first time ever, we have a guest on the show. Um,
So as we mentioned in our previous episode, in this episode we'll be talking about growth mindset, and we have with us here Luke Taylor, who is our employer. And we had also mentioned him in several past episodes, and now you guys finally get to meet him. Yay!
Here I
Yay! Luke
am.
made us put him on this episode. Just
Wow,
kidding.
wow. Come, good, strong start. Hello, nice to see you both. Thank you for having me. Apparently, hopefully that was volitional.
It is.
So Luke is the director of admission programming at our company, which is a coaching admission company, and we work with a lot of students. So that is why we are very passionate about the topic of education. And one topic that one theme that we can
We
see
explore a lot.
we explore a lot, and we help our students explore by themselves too is growth mindset. And so today we want to talk about growth mindset and how we can cultivate growth mindset in our daily life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chang, for the introduction. And to start off with this episode, Luke, I do want to ask you. So, what is the purpose of education, and what is your definition of education?
Yeah, so it's a great question because I think often when we think of education, we immediately associate it with school. So much of our lives is structured around education in this formal setting. In the United States, it's kind of K through 12, and then through college, and in Vietnam, high school starting in 10th grade through 12th grade. But I think education, like broadly defined, can be anything that allows us to learn or to grow, whether that's a skill, whether that's developing a skill set related to a profession, related to musical instrument, creativity, but also knowledge that's related to self and our place and our understanding of the world. So I think education, like in the broadest sense, is related to growth, which is probably why we're having this discussion about growth mindset. And I think what's useful is thinking about education not just in its formal sense, which is to say structured by school, which is to a degree like a modern invention. The way we think about school at the moment is like a very kind of modern invention, even though we've had like formal education for a couple thousand years. But it's useful, at least in the way we talk about it at Spark Prep often, is returning education to the hands of students so that students can really drive their educational process, can have some sense of agency. Because I think it's really difficult to learn when you don't have a sense of agency, when you feel like you're being coerced into something. And I think we all know students where we've experienced it ourselves. We're like, wait, why am I here? Why am I in this class? I hate this topic. I hate this subject. I don't see the value in it. And I think it's a shame if our orientation to education stays in that place, stays in this place of education doesn't belong to me, learning doesn't belong to me. So I think so much of what's interesting to me, or what I'm curious about, is how do we create experiences or interventions with students? And I don't really love that word intervention, but how do we create opportunities for students to own their own education again? I think that's really vital over the lifetime of an adult, over the lifetime of a human, for us to know that we can learn new things and that we're really in charge of our own education. It doesn't just belong in the hands of institutions or in structured settings. So it's a little bit of a longer answer, but yeah, education, I think, is anything that allows us to learn or grow capacities, awareness, knowledge, skills that enrich our lives.
Thank you for that. I love that answer, and I think it is why, like Chang and I share a little bit about our interview with you in the beginning, of our Spark Prep journey, and how we all share, the same definition of education, and that's why we've been with the company for so long.
Yeah, and I think I really agree with you that when we think about education, the first thought that comes to our mind oftentimes is about school, because like it's a structure that we first become familiar with when we think about education, when we starting from when we're young. But education is about lifetime learning as well.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've been out of formal education for a very long time, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm constantly thinking about learning. I'm thinking about how am I going to learn to cook this dish? I'm constantly
Mm-hmm.
thinking about how do I learn to understand the economy better? I'm constantly thinking about how do I learn to cut my dog's hair, right? Develop a new skill that like actually would materially make my life better in some way.
Yeah.
So even if they're very discrete,
Mm-hmm.
isolated things, um, to have a deep sense that we are beings that are capable of learning in an ongoing sense, really for the whole duration, for the whole time that we're on this planet doing this kind of living thing. Living and learning are really inextricably linked from one another. Um, and I think the earlier we can return that experience to students, the better.
Mm. Yeah. So, what is a growth mindset, and what is the role of growth mindset in education?
Yeah. So growth mindset is a term that was coined by Carolyn Dweck, who's a professor of psychology at Stanford University, and it really in a scientific setting, and she has a very elegant way of discussing it. Really is an acknowledgement that human beings, from a neuroplasticity perspective, and I think that that's a really complex term that warrants more discussion. Um, have the ability to grow new dimensions and new capacities of self. And so growth mindset is really the mindset, the orientation that says that actually very, very little of who I am and what I am is set in stone. And actually quite a lot of who I am and what I am is something that can be grown and developed through the application of effort. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of through her work, she talks about how this orientation, right, having the mindset that we are beings who grow, allows us to have kind of a different experience of reality. So all of a sudden, we're no longer people who are bad at math. Maybe we just haven't acquired the skill of math, or had certain experiences within math that might have us identify as people who are good at math. And that's, I think, a pretty big departure, because I think a lot of us identify as people who are bad at fill in the blank, right? I certainly was someone who identified as bad at math. And it's actually really only as an adult that, my partner is like, you're good at math sometimes. Like, you talk a lot about math. And that's only something that I came to much, much later. Um, yeah. So growth mindset is this, I hesitate to call it a curiosity, but it's an understanding that we are constantly evolving beings, and when we orient that way, actually, it's much easier to develop new skills and to develop new capacities that we don't already possess, whether they're creative or technical or intellectual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I really liked the work of Carol Dweck as well, because I feel like it really opens up possibility. And I one key point in one of her very big TED talks was that the power of the word yet. So it's kind of like you said, shift the understanding that I'm bad at something into I just haven't learned it yet or haven't mastered it yet. Um, and beyond the scope of education, for me, when I think of growth mindset, I also think of, I relate it to my personal like therapeutic journey, right? Because there's always a lot of um, when it comes to the conversation of shame, right? It's like I'm a bad person, and I think that's kind of like an example of fixed mindset. And seeking therapy, in a sense, is like we're changing this perspective, and we're going to look at it as like, oh, I did something that I wasn't proud of, right? Or there's something that doesn't work for me, but I'm going to work on that. Um,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that that's, sorry, go ahead, Mick. Go ahead, Tang.
Uh, no, I was gonna say that like the concept of growth mindset, I think it relates a lot to like how we see the world. Like in a more objective, like a more real way, in a more accurate way, and also how we see ourselves. Because when we think that we're not good at something, but it's actually just that we haven't really had the time to really learn that thing yet, or that we haven't really, like, we just haven't been good at it yet. It's not that we're bad at it.
mm,
And Yes, and so I think for me, it also relates a lot to therapy because also a lot of patterns, a lot of thought process and behaviors that need to be unlearned and need to be like improved in therapy. But if we think that this is who we are and we cannot change and there's no way that we can be a better person, then there's no point
Mm-hmm.
in doing therapy anymore. But that's not true. It's just that we haven't really had the tool, or that we haven't really
Gone through the necessary journey.
yeah, or had been guided in the right direction yet. And
or
so
had the opportunity.
yeah.
I think one of the useful things that is, well, one of the important conversations when we're talking about growth mindset is also what growth mindset isn't, right? Growth mindset
Mhm.
also is not a dismissal of the structural and institutional features that contextualize our lives, right? Like I really like what you said about the yet, right? A little baby would not be like, oh no, I don't know how to play the piano. Like, bro, you haven't had the opportunity yet, right? You don't even have finger dexterity yet to like push keys yet, or to talk about the myriad systemic lack of opportunities that many communities experience throughout time and for a variety of different reasons. So growth mindset is not your problems don't exist for any reason or your experience of reality is wrong. I think it's
Mm.
important to note that growth mindset is not a judgment,
Mm.
and that growth mindset invites, as you said, Chang, this possibility to say like, oh, it may not actually be an accurate statement to say I'm not
Mm.
creative, but when I say that, what does that mean to me right now?
Mhm.
And is that actually an expression of a desire? Is there actually a desire behind my belief or the
Mm.
statement that I make, I'm not creative and I wish I were? And then actually, if I had growth mindset, I had access to that, access to the kind of the muscle or the orientation of growth mindset, that I could say like, and I'm now ready to like put some time or some resources behind the development of a creative practice, right? I think
Mm.
practice is so fundamental to growth mindset. So I love both the idea of possibility and yet, and I think those are fundamental features to good education and good learning. I think education that doesn't include possibility, I think again potentially removes a lot of agency from students,
Yeah.
and a model that includes growth mindset should be one that is empowering, should be one that refers back to a
Yeah.
student's individual agency.
Yeah, so I was gonna say for me, growth mindset is really empowering, and it's like a like like me naturally, I'm a very like pessimistic person, and like I hyper focus on the negativity side of things. But also when I was introduced to the concept of growth mindset, like it helped me see the world in a more like positive way, and helped me see that like bad things, they do not have to stay bad. Like
Mm-hmm.
there are ways that I can improve them,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, there are new possibilities that I can explore and make my life better. Yeah, so it's really
Yeah, and again, it's not a
empowering.
dismissal of our experience to say like
Right.
I'm sad, right? Like there's no growth mindset around I'm sad. Like you can have the
Mhm.
experience of I'm sad,
Mhm.
but that's different from like I'm sad because I'm unlovable, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm unlovable is not actually a true statement. And so, but if we have growth mindset, I think if we continue to draw that parallel to therapy,
Mhm.
it actually invites us to say like, well, what is really true here,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And when we inquire into that, then there's actually more possibility again, and we
Mhm.
can encounter what might be true, what might be actual, and that's
Mhm.
extremely powerful, right? That changes lives,
Mhm.
not just in these kind of like small technical frameworks of like I don't know coding and okay, but I could go learn that, but in these like huge shifts of self, right? Like I don't think of myself as a creative person, but then I put some effort there, and all of a sudden I have these moments where, oh my goodness, I experienced creativity. Maybe I am. And right. And you
Mhm.
hear all these stories, particularly of people in their 30s and 40s who always conceived of themselves in this one way. And then they have this
Mhm.
experience, and then that conception completely shifts.
Yeah.
And I think the value of growth mindset from as an instructional tool is providing those moments earlier and earlier so that possibility can continue to exist earlier and earlier for young people in particular.
Yeah. And you know what you just said about people discovering new things about them, or like ways that they could be, different from their like preconceived notion of themselves. Uh, it's kind of like our podcast.
Yeah.
We we didn't think we could actually do something or like have contents that resonates with people.
Yeah, we didn't think people that would like it. We just thought that we want to do this thing, we're just going to do it.
Yeah. And even the learning process was like, oh, we're low tech people, I can say that. And slowly we're figuring it out, and then each steps kind of change my change how I feel about myself. Like, oh, okay, I can actually do this, so maybe let's push a little bit harder. We did audio only, and now we do video, and now we do remote recording. Mind blowing.
And that is always how it goes, right? It very rarely goes from like 0 to 100, right? It goes from 0 to 1 first, right? I often will talk to my students about, because college applications can be so stressful and can induce so much anxiety. For students who are experiencing anxiety and like experiencing chronic self-doubt, I say, let's not look at the top of the mountain that you're trying to scale, called submitting your college applications or even going to college first. Like I'll handle that. I'll handle like the vision for the college, like for the top of the mountain. Let's just talk about like what this first step is. Let's take step 1, and then let's take step 2. And then by the time we get to step 2, we might actually have a clearer sense of the picture. Maybe there's actually like this hidden path that's like actually a super shortcut that you couldn't have seen. But if you stay stuck in step 1, it's really difficult to see that shortcut or that alternate path. Of course, that's terrifying, because when you're at square one, at least the distress is orienting. You're like, well, it can't get worse from here, because like I know what it's like here. At least I know what it's like from this spot. But almost all good things happen from like at least taking the first step, even if you don't know the entire path first. But that's very hard. But growth mindset says start first, and in the starting, you kind of learn how to do it.
Yeah. And like you talked about, like students often see the college application process as, like when they finish the application, is this, like the mountaintop. But actually it's about, like each step during the process. And so in the previous episode, when Zoe and I, we talked about the education system that we went through, and we talked about this a lot, that students, like they are taught to see each mountaintop as the goal for them to strive towards, and if they fail to reach that, they feel like they're a failure, and they are not taught to really see the process and how far they've come during the process. And there are very like few and fixed milestones for students to achieve,
or just human in general.
Yeah, or like in this society, to make them feel like they have some worth, like they're valuable. And we talked about it, and I think it's the way that the formal education, like the school system and everything, like it paints this very fixed like definition of picture of what success looks like. And
a lot of this comes down to values, and you see this in kind of like any large scale system, whether this is like Occidental or whether this is in Vietnam or whether this is elsewhere. It is like, what does the system value, and what is the system trying to produce in students, right? And the pity that I think we agree on, right? Like we're a little bit preaching to the choir here, is that there's you invest so much time as a student, you invest so much time into preparing to like hit these peaks, and then you don't, and you have no alternative to conceptualize of how that time was well spent, whether that was valuable. Did I learn study skills? Did I learn how to like, did I develop relationships in the process of that preparation? And instead it's very much binary, right? It's I either succeeded or I failed. And in fact, that's just not a very robust system. It's an extremely not robust system, to say nothing of the fact that, again, it reinforces this idea that that's what life is about, that it is only about this like success or failure. And that, I think, again robs students from a lot of agency. And then, when they don't inevitably fit into these systems, they don't know how to orient, right? They don't know, like, what is my sense of self-worth? So all of a sudden,
Yeah.
this like I'm unlovable story becomes very real, right? Because we're getting a lot of these messages. So the things that we say to ourselves, they're not with bad reason, right? Again, like when I worry before I've gone to therapy that I might be unlovable, like I might have gotten messages either from the systems around me or from culture, from media, from my parents, that was in fact true in that particular moment. I think the question that we as educators want to ask is, like, what is the like lifetime experience that we would like students to have? And generally speaking, we would like them to be fulfilled and happy and like satisfied and like thriving and like have rich lives full of like discovery and relationship. But what's interesting and what's challenging is systems often are trying to solve for different things. Sometimes systems are trying to solve for like developing compliant workers, right? Like that's a spicy take, but a lot of the history of the education system in the United States oftentimes was the result of like workers just needed daycare, right? Like so that, that they could go to work and then they come back and then their kids would stay in that same cycle. So it wasn't really about producing like scholastic excellence. And we haven't really like, revolutionized that system so much from like a public education model. And so, a lot of these really big intractable systems, public education systems kind of like around the world, really struggle with that. They struggle with change. We struggle with this like one size fits all model. It does not. And so we kind of like wonder why our young people, grapple with mental health challenges or grapple with like, not having a clear sense of self or direction, or having, extraordinary pessimism or cynicism for the future. So, I can't remember, how we got on this topic or how it relates to growth mindset, but
I love it. I'm all for it.
yeah, the point being that oftentimes we have good reason to feel the way that we feel because the systems that we live our day to day through like really reinforce those messages, and it takes a lot of effort. This is why like growth mindset is often there's a lot of like unlearning first that needs to happen before we can like use the muscle of growth mindset. And even when we've been in therapy for years and years, we sometimes can sense that instinct that we like know is not true, right? Like our instinct might still be to like disparage ourselves, even though we know we've like done enough therapy to know like, no, that thought about how you're a bad person isn't true. We've like talked about it with like Dr. So-and-so like a million times already, but it's still kind of there, right? Like these habits are not necessarily like immediately easy to break. So just being introduced to the idea of growth mindset, #change your life, that doesn't happen overnight. It does require the application of like focus and effort and support, right? You can't really do it alone, right? You need community, you need guidance, you need mentorship, you need support. And I think, not to plug Spark Prep, but I think that is part of what we hope to do as an organization is provide that support to students so that they can feel that encouragement that doesn't have an agenda. Like, no, I actually secretly don't care where you go to college. I care about like, are you happy? Are you healthy? Are you thriving? And like parents are like side-eyeing me. They're like, yeah, but, and I'm like, no, but like, actually I don't care. I really don't. I only care if you're happy.
Oh God. That's a great digression. Thank you, Chang, for that important, conversation on system, right? In this question, I think we touched on this a little bit already, but I still want to hear from you. Why is a growth mindset important?
Yeah. So, without repeating too much of what we talked about, I think because, I'll just speak from like where I'm at these days. I think growth mindset is important because it allows for kind of magic in life, like, and not magic like Harry Potter magic or magic, but I really mean like I kind of mean transformation, I guess.
Mm,
I mean, it allows for something that maybe we might not have imagined for ourselves.
mm,
But when you encounter the idea of growth mindset, and you really understand the mechanics of it, like the psychology. I don't mean like the way that it's been adopted into like pop culture, because I think growth mindset has largely been taken out of context and is used almost to be synonymous with grit, right? And I don't think
mm,
growth mindset is intended to mean grit. I think growth mindset is intended to mean, what can you imagine for yourself,
mm,
and what would it take, what would it take for that to be brought into reality?
mm,
And growth mindset says, actually, many times that can happen if we think about like the effort and the structure and the systems that would need to be put in place, the
mm,
practice usually to get you there, right? And I
mm,
think the examples of creativity are really useful because, I mean, growth mindset is so much around like, yes, you, even if I started playing the piano today, I could learn how to play Chopin if that was,
mm,
if I put in the effort
mm,
every day. And I know that to be a fact because of the science of growth mindset. Whereas like,
mm,
imagine the world growth mind, the phenomenon of growth mindset didn't exist. It
mm,
would just be like, because I don't know how to play Chopin today, I can't play Chopin, period. No
mm,
imagination, no discovery, no sense of possibility.
mm,
And so like, that's pretty profound, I think. You know, so fill in the blank for any Chopin that sparks your heart, right? For some people that's cooking, for some people that's race car driving, for some people that's starting a company, for some people whatever it happens to be. If that is truly your desire, and then you orient to growth mindset, that can be a tool, and it really is a tool. It's not a dogma. It's a tool. A framework. You can often get there. Again, this is not to make systems or institutions insurmountable, right? Like,
mm,
white supremacy does not just like immediately go away because we say like, you know, expecto growth mindset. Like, that's not how it works.
mm,
But growth mindset can help us orient, can use the biology of the brain. I think that's the better way of talking about it, right? Like, the science of neuroplasticity tells us that so much about our brain actually is pliant, particularly when it comes to learning.
mm,
And that's why I love it. That's why we're talking about it.
mm,
As opposed to the old dogma, right? The old ideology used to be, no, you're born with this like set of immutable capacities,
mm,
and like, don't look outside the box, right? That's
mm,
the old dogma. But science has shown us that that's not the case.
mm,
Yeah, and the talk about your example to with like learning how to play the piano uh, reminds me of the 10,000 hours theory that have made popular by um, Malcolm Gladwell. Also really the emphasis on to be able to master anything, you really need to put in the effort. And you just made the distinction between growth mindset and grit. And I think this one does have like kind of
mm,
more of like grit, and you need to really put in a lot of hours, but also it's the emphasis on effort rather than innate
mm,
talents
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
able to achieve something. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think for our purposes, what we like to think about at least is, can we zoom in on hour 4 and like talk about it and reflect on it, and like, and see what went well and what didn't go. Can we zoom in on hour 137, etc., right? Like, each of those hours has value. Even the name of the book, or like the 10,000 hour phenomenon, I don't love, because that's still mountaintop, you know, like
yeah,
that's still like obsessing over the end, right?
yeah,
And growth mindset is still, let's look at the process. And the process is, no, I'm constantly growing, right? Like, my
mm,
brain is an evolving, not in the evolutionary biology, but is a growing organism. And if I orient myself properly, different dimensions of my experience can come into being. And if I would like those dimensions to be one or the other, I can
mm,
apply effort in one direction or another, right? Like, the
mm,
boat is still heading in this direction, and I can tack one way or another. But yeah, again, even the 10,000 hours is still like top of the mountain thing. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
Yeah, Zoe talked about, like how the 10,000 hours theory is actually sounds a lot like, like growth mindset equals great. and I have the same notion about it as well. And I still think, like if you set a goal for yourself is to spend 10,000 hours on, like a, a equivalent amount of hours onto trying to do something, and you still haven't really achieved what you set out for yourself to achieve, then what do you think? Then, you know,
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Then I wasted all my time, right?
Mhm.
And it really encourages us, I think, to be really precise about our goals, right?
Mhm.
Because like even if I start with like, oh, my goal is to play Chopin, how? Right?
Mhm.
Perfectly, like the way like Itzhak Rubin played, right? The way that like I could, bang out like each note individually and really take my time. You know what I mean? I can do that probably. So I think growth mindset also encourages us to be really precise about our goals,
Mhm.
because when we're precise about our goals, it
Mhm.
actually forces us to like think about where we are in this moment and be really,
Mhm.
really honest with ourselves. And
Yeah.
oftentimes we have like much more capacity even in this moment than
Mhm.
we thought we did,
Yeah.
and so even just like engaging in the thought exercise
Mhm.
of like what do I want my goal to look like and how might I
Mhm.
get there requires us to kind of take inventory of where we are in this moment and how we got here. Would I like to do anything differently? Right.
Mhm.
And so you can kind of sense like I'm bringing the whole critical thinking
Mhm.
thing into the conversation, which I always love. And again,
Mhm.
that too is about being in touch with reality
Yeah.
more than like the story that we have about reality, and that
Mhm.
just requires some examination.
Yeah.
And I think again tools like growth mindset can help you know give us some orientation. I know I keep coming back to that word, to
Mhm.
understand what is the space that we're moving from right now, right in this moment.
Yeah, and to your point about growth mindset, I think it can also be a tool for, like cultivating self awareness, and, like being mindful about yourself and, about the world around you. By setting goal, like you sit with yourself and you think about, like, what do I want for myself, and what is realistic for me. And
Totally.
like Zoe and I, we have this your concurrent theme in our podcast. It's always about self awareness in everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just talking to a student about self-awareness before this call. I mean, the funny thing about self-awareness is it's it's endless, right? Like
Mm.
no matter
Yeah.
where you are on the self-awareness
Mm.
journey, right? Like it's kind of infinite. There's always more to go. There is no
Yeah.
like I am
Yeah.
self-aware, period. Like I won the self-awareness game. There is like there's like a bottomless well of
Mm.
self-awareness to engage in and constantly uncover. And like if you're disposed that way, you can kind of sit and navel gaze and learn infinite things about yourself, and
Mm.
then maybe you're called a monk, maybe that
Mm.
becomes your life, and that is beautiful and valuable. um, but I think this is the case with so many of the practices that we might adopt. They open up aspects of our lives that we didn't know actually before we started the process. This is why like starting is so valuable, because in starting you open the possibility of learning things that you couldn't have known until you picked up a little speed, until you had a little bit of momentum
Mm.
behind you, and then all of a sudden there's so much, like the insight just kind of comes, and then they're really reinforcing, right? They kind of
Mm.
build on one another, and there's so much, there can be a lot of joy in that process. There can also be a lot of grief, right? You can learn, you
Mm.
can
Yeah.
encounter things that you were like, oh, that is sad times. I did not know I was going to like talk about that in therapy today.
Mm.
But both of those things ultimately are liberatory in nature as
Mm.
we continue to kind of like again apply that effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, like in therapy, when we have to unlearn behaviors and, like toxic tendency or like toxic thought process, there's actually grief in that as well,
Yeah.
because you've been with those notions for so long, and you gotta
It's
be,
familiar.
yeah, it's familiar, and it's way the source of, like information that you make sense of the world. And when you have to part way with that,
Yeah.
there can be a
Yeah.
lot of
Like
sense of
parting
And
grief.
how much those things have like insinuated themselves into your personality and your
Mm.
your
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
Like it
mindset
kind of
in ways that
becomes
you just didn't know.
like, as in like, oh, like that's a part of your identity that
Mm.
in a way you have to part with, right?
Mm.
Um even though you would love to no longer be associated with those, but the unlearning process,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
can be
But
quite.
also just like grief for our own ignorance, right? For I mean, but really, you know, like for the suffering that we went through, like sometimes
Mm,
like needlessly, right? Like we suffered
mhm,
often.
Yeah.
Sometimes we suffer needlessly because of our own ignorance. And
mhm,
education, like true education, is the process of greater liberation. And
mhm,
I won't say the overcoming of ignorance, because we can never really like fully overcome ignorance, but like seeing truly the
mm,
ways in which our ignorance causes our suffering.
Mm.
And that is both joyful and painful.
You know, it's when we're talking about our previous like identity or things that we unlearn in therapy, I think an important part of it is the cognitive distortion
Mm.
that goes with, you know, our upbringing or
Mm.
how the system or how society have taught us to view ourselves.
Mm.
And so this is, I guess, still very much related to this question. And I do like, in this, I really want to share with different people all the time. Like
Mm.
when they share with me some of their struggle,
Mm.
and I could identify,
Mm.
you know, maybe like some cognitive distortions that play right there. So can you talk a little bit about, you know, the common cognitive
Cognitive.
distortion that you see in students that you
Mhm.
work with?
Oh, sure, sure,
Yeah.
sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, you know, with the disclaimer that I'm not a therapist. I mean, we made some we named some good ones earlier, and I think even though I'm not a therapist, there is quite a lot of overlap between the amount of vulnerability that comes through in student essays sometimes,
Mm,
right? Through the college application process, like as a coach, students often will like share things about their inner workings, their inner life, their inner thought processes. I'm bad, right? Like
mm,
that, just that one, just like the very blunt, I'm
mm,
bad, right? Like
Mm.
students say this, students say I'm
mm,
bad. Like, how could you possibly, you know, how could you possibly be bad, right? I'm bad or I failed, right?
Mm.
We talked about this earlier, whether like even just like, you know, applying to get a position in a club, I failed.
Mm.
I mean, maybe you didn't get the position, or like, but like, was the process itself a
Mm.
failure? The conversations you had, the discussions, like the preparation, all like every step.
Mm.
Other cognitive distortions. I'm not good enough, or like my peers are better than me. Like
Mm.
we have, again, we just like have these absolutist kind of
mm,
orientations
Mm.
sometimes to who we are, often in connection to others. Very
Mm.
normal, right? Lots of us compare ourselves to
Mm.
others. I think it's one of the most human things, and it is. It's still sometimes painful to see young
Mm.
people make these like really they're just super harsh on themselves sometimes. And again, I think systems often reinforce this. But let's see what other cognitive distortions. Yeah, I think those are big ones. I mean, the I'm bad one feels like the central cognitive distortion, like
Yeah.
in life. Right? Like if there's a central one, it's
Yeah.
that one.
Yeah. Those absolute statements, like we talked about shame, and I think that
mm,
relates a lot to shame. Like when you have shame, you do not believe that you'll be better or you deserve to be better.
Right?
You're just
Yeah.
a bad, small human that will never, you know, you stay that way
And
forever, and there's no one that can help you.
exactly. And it can be as subtle as like
Mm.
you see like a shadow cross your mother's
Mm.
face, you know, when you bring home
Mm.
a grade that you don't love, and like all of a sudden like her anxieties from her upbringing, like
Mm.
even if she doesn't say anything. And so like,
Mm.
you know, the passing on of shame can
Mm.
be so subtle, can be so
Yeah.
pernicious, can be so unintended, right? And like
Mm.
Chang, I remember another conversation Chang, you and I were having about like parenting. I'm not a
Mm.
parent. I'm not in any position to give advice to anybody about parenting. But I think we were talking about like how not to like mess our kids up,
Yeah.
right? And I think it must be, inevitably there will be things that we do to harm our kids just
Mm.
because we're human and we're fallible and we contain
Mm.
so many of the traumas that like humanity passed down through us. And I
Mm.
think the answer is just can we love enough so
Mm.
that we have enough experience, the child has enough experiences of like absolutely unconditional love, enough
Mm.
moments of joy and discovery
Mm.
and like safety to feel
Mm.
like they can develop secure attachment that might overcome that moment of shame, right? Like even if
Yeah.
you experience like an acute moment of shame,
Mm.
it's still like it's sitting within a sea of love. I think we are still okay, right? If that's how we live our lives as like parents and families, I think that's probably still okay.
Yeah, and because you talked about parenting and like just giving your kid enough love, unconditional love and safety, so like the kid will not be messed up as messed up as we are. And I think for me, like my parenting journey involves a lot of like growth mindset and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of also like unlearning the shame. And like because I experience sometimes when I lose my cool with and when she screams or something, like, and I can see like the image of my mom like in my mind screaming at me, and there's an urge in me to just recreate that behavior, recreate that
Pattern.
image, that pattern to her. But I have to stop myself, and I have to think that I'm better than that, and I can be better, and I can unlearn that to not pass that down to her.
Well, also that you have a different set of tools than your mother had access to. I think about this all the
Yeah.
time when I think about my parents and the ways that
Mhm.
we experience life different. Like I just have access
Mhm.
to a
Yeah.
body of knowledge that they
Mhm.
never had access to,
That's
right? Like when
true.
my parents and I are talking about like race and ethnicity, gender, power,
Mhm.
colonialism, when we're having all like the big topic conversations, I
Mhm.
had access to an education they didn't have access to.
Mhm.
Likewise, like you had access, you have
I have
practice and a
therapy.
tool set. You have therapy. Yeah, absolutely. You now know it's okay to say, and I'm frustrated right now. You know what I mean? To like, and that's okay. That's not harm. You can
Mhm.
say, oh God, I'm frustrated.
Mhm.
Right. And like maybe that's enough for you in that moment, maybe not. But
Or,
it's not about like,
oh, sorry. Or Chang, look at N. Like, I love you, but you're getting on my nerves right now.
Yeah.
yeah. But I think, even that to a degree is growth mindset,
Mm.
acknowledging the ways in which we have already
Mm.
grown,
Mm.
in which our habits, right,
Mm.
our inclinations, even if we still have like impulses, or maybe not
Mm.
impulses, but even if we still have feelings that we don't like feel proud of,
Mm.
we have enough insight now, enough practice, enough self-awareness, and enough tools to help us make choices that are more in line with our values. And I think it's important to say it's like that's not the repression of like, no, actually I'd really like to like toss my baby across the street, or like, it's not to like deny, I'm not denying that I'm upset in this moment or I'm
Mm.
frustrated in this moment.
Mm.
Feelings are important, but you
Mm.
have like a much more robust tool set. And
Mm.
again, I think that is all kind of like in the sphere of growth mindset of
Mm.
acknowledging like, if you had this baby 10 years ago, maybe you wouldn't have had that same
Right.
knowledge, right? Maybe you
Yeah.
actually would have yelled,
Mm.
right? And just that acknowledgement is a profound
Mm.
Yeah.
um, impact of growth mindset.
Mm.
Yeah. I like the word acknowledgement
Mm.
because it does, when I think about therapy or even growth mindset, there's this thing that, acknowledging what is within our control,
Mm.
for us to focus our effort
Mm.
or have a concrete plan and end result, things that we can control, or what's outside of our control, right? So for
Mm.
example, with Chang, like she can't control how her mom reacted to her, or like, discipline her when
Mm.
she was younger, but she now has a control over how she, interact with her kid. And I
Mm.
think it's also a
It's very empowering.
mhm.
Yeah. To know what I can control and what I cannot. And
Oh yeah.
yeah. And I just I think about shame a lot, and when like not just for this episode but like lately. And I also think about how to not let and feel any shame, because I felt a lot of shame growing up. Like for example, if I do not get this score on a test, I feel shame that I'm not a good enough student. And I think that the structure has taught us to feel shame if we are not fit in. Then we're different, and we're different means that we're bad. And I just don't want her to feel any shame. As a person.
three Tauruses on one podcast, all talking about shame. Yeah, I mean, I think I think shame is inevitable. I think shame is part of life. I don't think that we can protect those that we love from ever experiencing shame. But again, I think it comes back to this, because Anna's going to go back. She's going to go out into the world. You know what I mean? She's going to go out into the world, and
Yeah.
some motherfucker is just going to, is going to say some shit that we just like is not approved by the committee. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so then the question is like, how do we equip her with tools to not internalize that shame? And because I think the thing that the three of us share in common is like we did so much internalizing of shame when we were young, and we've had to spend some of our adult lives excavating that and healing that. And maybe that journey, right? Maybe the internalization journey is the thing that we can, save our children from. Maybe not. I don't know. But even if they do internalize that shame, and hopefully they won't, we live in a time now where there are tools available. At least there's frameworks available now. I think about this all the time, that like we we're like the therapy generation to a degree. Like we've so normalized therapy, and we're at different like stages in the millennial kind of generation. But like even when I was growing up, therapy was still pretty edgy, I think, in like the United States. I grew up on the East Coast outside of Boston. And like, I started going to therapy like very young when my parents got divorced, and it was still pretty uncommon. And I developed like a normalization and an understanding that was like normal and good, and got a lot of benefit from it. And I was like super stoked about it. And was very surprised when I would tell people that I was like in therapy, they'd like cross their eyes at me. This was like in like late 90s, early 2000s. It's 2022, and people are still kind of like, oh, therapy. Like, so by the time N grows up, it will be even more normal. And we will have brought those values and techniques and tool sets more broadly into culture. So I think the seeking out of support and pathways for healing will be more right. We just see this in Gen Z, right? Like Gen Z is all about the healing journey, right? Like Gen Z has already really normalized, right? Like even if we don't have access to therapy, and that's a big issue, and we should continue to work on it as a society, we at least Gen Z has all like gotten on the same page that it's a good thing, right? That it's a valuable thing that we want everybody to have. So I think I don't know. I at least take hope that as Anne and her generation continue to grow older, that it will be more ubiquitous, and things like it will be more ubiquitous, hopefully.
Yeah. And our last question not the last question, but we talked about this, I guess, extensively in the beginning when Chang mentioned system in growth mindset, or in fixed mindset, or like perpetuating that. Do you Sorry, I just realized that, look, you actually gave like a very sufficient answer on this question already.
Great. count it.
So for our audience, please go back to minute 15 to 20 for that part of the system and the role it plays. So I'm going to skip straight to the last question, which is so Luke, to close this up, what advice do you give students to practice they're having a growth mindset?
Yeah, I think one of the most useful things when developing a growth mindset early on is look for evidence in your life where growth mindset is already at play. Right. Growth mindset is not a dogma. It's a scientific evaluation of how so much of our lives already operate. Right. And I think for, if I were like maybe a teen and I was like really into video games, right? Like we see growth mindset in video games, right? Like you get owned by the youth, in your first couple of rounds of League of Legends or Valorant. And then you're like, no, wait, I really want to get good at this. And then you do, right? And that same orientation can be used in so many areas of life. The difficulty is there's so much energetic charge related to the academic subjects like math and like writing, right? We've already developed an identity of I'm bad at writing, I'm bad at math, I'm bad at physics, right? If there are opportunities for us to really examine and say, like, what if physics was like video games? What if the point I'm at in physics right now is like the point I was at in Valorant 6 weeks ago, or League of Legends six months ago, or whatever, right? That's a ridiculous consideration, but actually it's not so ridiculous because our minds work very similarly. Our brains work similarly. So I think the first piece of advice that I would look at is look for evidence in your life where things like growth mindset are already at play. And then the second thing that I would say is look at it in your friends, right? Your friends who you think of as talented or as great. Look at the places in their life where they are still learning, right? Where they're in the process of working on something. And then the final thing that I would say about growth mindset is effort doesn't have to be 0 or 100, right? You can work casually on things, right? Like, we often talk about like internalized capitalism, meaning that we often feel like we have to produce something. Like, if I'm an artist, I must be the best artist. If I'm a creative, I must be the best creative. And you can improve on things casually. Like, if you want to learn a language, but you don't need to learn it like yesterday, like work on it casually. Like, effort can be applied at like a 5 or a 6 sometimes, and that's fine. It doesn't need to be all out for everything all the time. That's like a recipe for burnout. So those are maybe like a few things that I would use to start.
Yeah, thank you.
And so thank you very much for being on this episode with us.
Thank you.
And sharing like your thoughts very like extensively and very like coherently.
I think that we strive to do.
Zoe and I certainly learned a lot from this episode, and I think our audience will too. So thank you. And
thank you.
Yeah, and I would also want to plug Spark Breath.
You can plug without mentioning the plugging. So Spark Prep is this great, fun shelter for runaway youth. I'm just kidding.
In a way, it is like emotional runaway kids. But we do admission coaching for undergraduate and also postgraduate in like law, medical application.
So we work with students if you're thinking of applying to programs in the States or Canada.
And this is the vibe. This is the vibe.
This is the
vibe is like this.
And so if you or your friends or your family are interested in learning about studying abroad or how to get started on your application process, don't hesitate to
reach out to us.
Reach out to us, mainly me, not Chang. She will not reply. She's busy taking care of her baby, but
I work in marketing. So Zoe will be your person when you contact us, because that's basically her job at Spark Bread.
Yes, please keep me paid until Two Girls One Podcast can actually generate income for Chang and I.
Yeah.
And anyway, thank you, Luke, so much for spending the hour.
Thank you, guys, with us. And congratulations on. Thank you. Likewise.
Okay, so see you
in our future episodes. Hopefully, you too, Luke. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.